The first snow came soft as a secret, falling in fat, silent flakes that settled over the pines and hills like a prayer. Wina Black Elk sat still beside the fire, the orange light painting shadows across the room's rough-hewn walls. He hadn't spoken in hours, hadn't needed to. The wind outside told all the stories worth hearing. It pushed gently at the shutters, whistled through the chimney, stirred the smoke of cedar logs until it curled like old memories around his boots. He was oiling his knife, slow and steady. The steel edge caught the firelight just as a knock, 3 quiet taps, broke the hush. He froze. No one came this far up the ridge, not this time of year. Not with the snow falling and the light dying. No rider, no preacher, no trader. Only trouble knocked this time of night. Wina rose, knife still in hand, and stepped to the door without sound. He opened it just wide enough to see. She stood there like a ghost from the edge of a storm. A woman, settler by the looks of her, wrapped in a threadbare shawl already soaked through. Her cheeks were wind-chapped, her lips trembling not from cold, but something deeper. In one arm she held a sleeping child no older than 3, limp with exhaustion. Beside her, a girl stood half-hidden behind her skirts, thin arms clutched around a battered carpet bag. Wina didn't move. She met his eyes. Hers were green, rimmed red with cold and something close to shame. "They ain't yours," she said, her voice raw. "But they need you." Snow whispered between them, landing on the brim of Wina's hat and the child's curls. The woman didn't elaborate. She didn't beg. Wina studied her face. Tired, proud, familiar in a way he couldn't place. She looked like someone who'd run too long and fallen silent too soon. He stepped aside. She hesitated only a moment before stepping in, ducking her head. The little girl followed, cautious but alert, her boots dripping meltwater onto the plank floor. Wina shut the door behind them. The wind was locked out, but the cold lingered. He added a log to the fire and motioned wordlessly to the bench near the hearth. The woman lowered the boy gently onto a folded blanket. His small hand twitched toward the warmth. The girl sat beside him, rubbing her fingers together, her eyes flicking to Wina, then quickly away. No one spoke. He ladled broth from the pot into a wooden bowl and handed it to the woman. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. They were rough, work-worn, but steady. She nodded her thanks and passed it first to the girl, who drank like she hadn't eaten in a day. "Name?" he asked, voice low. The woman glanced up, spoon pausing midway to her lips. "Agnes. Agnes May Dalton. This is Sadie. And the little one's Tommy." Wina nodded once. "You Black Elk," she said. It wasn't a question. "Heard your name. Years ago. My husband said you saved his skin during a skirmish down by Rosebud Creek." Wina didn't answer. He remembered many faces. Not many names. War blurred most things, except for the blood. Agnes set the bowl down. "He's dead now." Another silence. Only the fire cracked. Wina looked at the boy. Pale. Too thin. Sadie's face was smudged with road dust and something harder. Fear that had turned quiet and obedient. "You come far." Agnes gave a soft laugh. "Far enough that turning back ain't an option." She didn't offer more, and Wina didn't ask. He made up a second cot from the pile of folded quilts and gestured toward it. The children were already nodding off. Agnes helped them lie down, brushing the girl's damp hair from her forehead, pulling a blanket up to the boy's chin. Wina poured water from the kettle into a basin, set it near her feet. She whispered thanks, washed her hands slowly, as if savoring the feel of heat again. Then she sat by the fire, one knee drawn to her chest, eyes half closed. Wina returned to his chair. He watched the fire, but his thoughts were on her voice, how it hadn't cracked when she'd said her husband's name, but trembled when she'd spoken of the children. She was running from something. He didn't need to know what yet. The wind howled against the roof once more before slipping away. The room grew still. Agnes's voice rose again, barely above her breath. "We got no kin that'll take us. Not after what happened." She didn't finish the sentence. "The preacher said we'd be a burden. The sheriff in Drayton said if we stayed the week, he'd put Sadie in a workhouse." Her hand twitched. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. But I remembered what my husband said, that there was a man once who saved him without asking why. Wina said nothing. He looked to the fire, then to the children, then to her. Her eyes didn't plead. They just waited. "You can stay," he said. "For now." Agnes exhaled, more relief than gratitude. She nodded and leaned back slightly, body still coiled, but not shaking anymore. Wina stood, walked to the back of the cabin, and took his rifle down from the wall. He checked the chamber, loaded it, and placed it by the door. She watched him. "Expecting trouble?" she asked. "Always," he replied. He sat again, quieter this time. Agnes lay down beside the children, folding herself around their small warmth like a shield. Outside, the snow deepened. Somewhere in the far hills, a coyote cried once, then was gone. Wina sat in the dark, the fire low and steady, the scent of cedar, smoke curling through the rafters. He wasn't sure what she carried or who might follow, but he'd let them in. And if someone came knocking for them next, he'd be the one to answer. Morning came silver and silent. The snow laid thick and undisturbed like it hadn't dared to shift in the night. Wina Black Elk stepped out into the cold with an armful of kindling, his boots crunching over the new white crust. The forest beyond his cabin stood tall and watchful, branches heavy with frozen weight. The world, for now, held its breath. Inside, Agnes was already on her feet. She moved with care around the hearth, coaxing the flames to life while the children still slept on the quilts. Her shawl hung damp over a chair. Her hair was unbraided, copper strands falling down her back. Wina noticed the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. She turned when she heard the door. "Coffee?" she asked. She was already steeping some in a blackened tin pot. He nodded once, set the kindling by the stove, and pulled off his gloves. As he did, Sadie stirred and blinked toward the light. She sat up slowly, wary eyes flitting between her mother and Wina. Agnes placed a cup in front of him. "Thank you," she said. She didn't specify whether she meant for the coffee, the fire, or the roof above their heads. Wina studied Sadie as she got to her feet. She moved with practiced quiet, keeping one hand on Tommy's back. She was 9 at most, yet already carried the stiffness of someone who didn't cry when it hurt. Wina took a sip. Bitter. Strong. "You been on the trail long?" Agnes nodded. "Since mid-autumn. We moved west when my husband got land rights near the Cimarron. He didn't last long." Sadie was looking out the frost-laced window. "They said he died in a fire," she said quietly. Agnes's jaw stiffened. "Yes." Wina didn't press. Truths came slowly, if at all. The morning passed in quiet labor. Agnes insisted on helping with chores, chopping carrots, scrubbing pans, feeding the chickens out back. She kept a steady rhythm, never letting her body rest too long, like a woman afraid of what stillness might reveal. Sadie followed Wina as he brought in wood from the lean-to. She didn't speak, just watched. When he knelt to stack the logs by the hearth, her small voice came, uncertain. "Did you ever have a daughter?" Wina paused, straightened, and met her gaze. "Yes," he said simply. Her eyes widened a little. "What happened to her?" He returned to his stacking. "The war happened." Sadie didn't ask more. She stood there a moment longer, then slipped back to Tommy, who was now awake and playing with a carved spoon. Later, when the sun sat low and gold against the snow-covered ridge, Wina hitched up the wagon. He needed flour and more lamp oil, and the children needed boots that didn't leak. Agnes hesitated when he told her they'd go to town. "Is that safe?" she asked. "For you, I mean." He looked at her, unblinking. "Safer than for you." Agnes lifted her chin. "Then I'll come." Sadie and Tommy were bundled in every layer they had, pressed between their mother and Wina on the wagon bench as they rode down into Red Hollow. The town was a speck of structures with more rumors than residents. Smoke curled from chimneys. Men lingered on porches with narrowed eyes and idle spittoons. Women paused in doorways, frozen mid-task. As they pulled up to the mercantile, silence rippled down the street like a dropped stone in still water. Agnes climbed down first, keeping her shoulders straight. Wina followed, lifting Tommy in one arm and holding Sadie's hand in the other. Inside, Miss Liddy Graves stood behind the counter with her usual apron and a smile sharp as a splinter. She was a widow too, but unlike Agnes, she carried her loneliness like a badge of virtue. "Well," Liddy said, looking them over. "Bringing your charity cases to town, Black Elk?" Agnes stiffened. Wina said nothing, only set the sack of flour on the counter and waited. Liddy continued, voice syrupy sweet. "You know, preacher says it's a kindness to help the poor. But pride's cheaper, dear." Her eyes landed on Agnes. Agnes's jaw tensed, but she didn't answer. Wina reached into his coat pocket, placed coins on the counter, and turned without a word. The silence he left behind spoke louder than anything he could have said. Outside, the children clutched new mittens, and a pair of hard candy sticks Wina had slipped into their hands. Agnes turned to him, her voice low. "You didn't have to do that." Wina met her eyes. "Didn't do it for you." She flinched, barely, but nodded. "Of course." But later, as the wagon rolled past the old churchyard and down toward the edge of the ridge, Agnes spoke again. "My husband's name was Silas Dalton. You ever hear it?" Wina's expression shifted. He nodded. "He was at Rosebud. Carried a green sash." Agnes gave a breath that sounded half laugh, half curse. "He always said you pulled him out when he got hit. Saved his fool life. Said you were the only decent man he'd ever met who didn't wear a collar." Wina kept his gaze on the road ahead. The wind blew thin snow off the branches above, and the flakes danced like ash. "Silas was kind once," Agnes said, "but he drank more than he prayed. After the fire, what was left of him wasn't worth much." Wina didn't answer. Some stories didn't need mending. That night, after the children were asleep, Wina sat sharpening his blade. Agnes folded laundry in the corner. Her voice came soft and tired. "They said I was cursed, that I brought bad luck wherever I went. My own kin said that." Wina looked up. "I tried to go home after Silas died," she continued. "They turned me away at the gate. Said they wouldn't raise bastards, even if one wasn't mine." Wina's eyes settled on her, unreadable. Agnes set down the shirt in her hands. "Tommy's not my blood. He was left in my arms during a wagon fire. Just left. Crying." She didn't cry as she said it. "I couldn't leave him." Wina rose, crossed the hearth, and stirred the fire. The flames rose. "Blood don't make family," he said. "Fire does." Agnes's breath hitched. She looked at him for a long moment, but didn't speak again. Outside, the wind picked up, curling against the door. Inside, it was warm, quiet. Before turning in, Wina reached into his pack and pulled out a worn comb. He handed it to Sadie, who had been brushing Tommy's hair with her fingers. She stared at it like it was gold. "Is it for me?" He gave a single nod. "Yours now." Agnes watched the exchange with wide eyes, one hand resting on her chest as if trying to hold something in place. When the lights dimmed and sleep came, it came slower for Wina. Names carried in the cold had a way of lingering longer than welcome. But tonight, under this roof, they were no longer just stories. They were people. And they were here. He would keep them safe. For now. The days settled into a rhythm not unlike music. Quiet, repetitive, necessary. Wina rose before the sun. Agnes brewed coffee before the water boiled. Sadie fed the hens, dragging a sack nearly as heavy as her, while Tommy toddled after her, clutching his wooden horse. The snow thickened, sealing the cabin from the world beyond the ridge, as if time itself had folded inward. They did not speak much, but in silence, the shape of their bond grew solid. One morning, Agnes stood at the chopping block with Wina's axe in hand. Her shawl slipped off one shoulder, hair bound tight behind her head. She raised the blade and brought it down with more determination than skill. Wina watched from the porch. Her second swing split the log awkwardly, nearly glancing off the grain. "You're turning your hips wrong," he said. She froze. "Didn't think you'd mind if I helped." "I don't." He stepped down, took the axe gently from her hands. "Like this." He showed her not just where to place her feet, but how to let the weight of the axe carry the motion. She watched, biting her lip, then tried again. The third strike landed clean. "Better," Wina said. Agnes allowed herself the smallest smile. "Used to chop firewood before I learned how to hem a dress." That's so. My pa didn't want useless daughters. Or soft ones. She handed the axe back. I failed him anyway. He didn't ask how. That night, after the children were put to sleep under their quilts, Agnes lingered by the fire. Wina sat across from her, cleaning his rifle, his movements precise. You don't ask questions, she said. Wina looked up. Most men I've met, white or Lakota, want stories. Want something owed before they give. I don't need to know your story to feed your children. Agnes tilted her head. But you wonder, don't you? Wina's voice was quiet. Wondering's not the same as needing. She hesitated, then said, I tried to love my husband. I really did. But there are things you can't fix with loyalty. She stared into the fire. He drank. He shamed me. After the baby died, ours, he blamed me. Then came the fire. I took the children and ran. He didn't speak. She lifted her eyes to him. I tried to kiss you the other night. I remember. You pulled away. I remember that too. Was it me, she asked, or the shame I carry? Wina set the rifle down and stood. He crossed the room, slow as snowfall. It wasn't you, he said. It was everything I carry. He looked at her then, not through her, not around her, right into her. My wife was killed. My daughter too. White men burned our village. Called it justice. Agnes's breath caught. I've carried that in my bones for 20 years. When I sleep, I still hear her scream. He sat beside her. Not touching. Not close. Just beside. I didn't pull away because of you, he said. I pulled away because I haven't been held by anyone who didn't die. She closed her eyes, slow. Outside, wind scraped snow across the cabin walls like distant whispering. You're the first man who ever told me something that terrible without asking for pity after. He didn't reply. She said, I'm not looking for saving, Wina. Good, he said. I'm not offering it. They stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, the fire casting flickers across the floor. The next day, Wina returned from the trap line with a rabbit and a crooked smile. Snow's easing, he said. Town's road might be passable soon. Agnes stiffened. You think we should go back? I didn't say that. I meant, you think we've worn out your kindness. He paused, looked at her a long moment. You think this is kindness? She blinked. He handed her the rabbit and turned away. This is living. You help. You stay. That's the pact. Later, Agnes found Sadie crouched behind the cabin, red-faced, fists clenched. A pair of rough boys from town had come near the ridge. Their voices carried on the cold air like taunts. Savage lover, they called out. Half-breed horse girl. Sadie refused to cry. Agnes knelt beside her, brushing ice from her cheeks. You don't listen to fools, she whispered. You listen to people who've bled and stay kind. Sadie's lip quivered. Am I his? I mean, if he wants us. Agnes pressed her forehead to Sadie's. You are whoever claims you with love. That night, when the cabin fell quiet again, Agnes shared what she hadn't dared speak. Tommy ain't mine by blood, she said, as she peeled potatoes by the firelight. During that fire, when I ran, someone shoved a baby into my arms. I never saw who. Just heard screaming. I ran with him. He cried all night. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes I wonder if I did wrong keeping him. But then he laughs, and I forget what doubt is. Wina stirred the stew in the pot. His voice was low. You kept him safe. That's enough. Agnes's eyes shimmered. What if it's not? He turned to her. Blood don't make family, he said. Fire does. She stilled. Her lips parted, then closed. And though the wind howled outside, though the world beyond the cabin kept turning cruel and unsure, something in the room steadied. That night, as Tommy slept curled against his sister, Wina took a carving knife and a block of pine. He sat up late, shaping something small and careful with calloused hands. In the morning, Sadie found it tucked beside Tommy's blanket, a tiny horse, no bigger than a walnut, its mane etched with patience. She didn't say a word, but she held it close all day. Wina didn't speak of it either. But when Agnes met his gaze across the breakfast table, her look held something fierce and fragile, like a woman who hadn't been given anything gentle in a long, long time, but now dared to believe. Not in promises, but in staying. The sky cracked with ice that morning. Pale gray light filtered through low clouds, laying a hush across the ridge. Even the birds were silent. Wina stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, watching the horizon where smoke, thin and curling, rose from the town like a signal. Trouble didn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it came with measured boots and laws wrapped in smiles. Agnes stepped beside him, her shawl drawn close, hair pinned. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She could see it in his jaw, the way he hadn't touched his coffee, the way he kept glancing toward the rifle resting beside the doorframe. "What is it?" she asked finally. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Sheriff Clegg came by while you were at the spring." Her breath caught. "What did he say?" Wina looked at her, steady. "He said I've got 2 days to be rid of you, or he'll do it for me." Agnes's lips parted, stunned. Then they firmed. "Let him try." But her voice shook at the edges, like a rope worn thin. Wina said nothing. He only stepped back inside, picked up the rifle, and checked the chamber with quiet precision. That afternoon, Agnes walked into town with Sadie, chin high despite the stares that scraped her like wind over bone. The general store door creaked open as they entered. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Miss Liddy gave a thin smile behind the counter. "Well, Agnes May," she said, smoothing her apron. "Didn't expect you to stay so long up there with him." Agnes set a jar of molasses on the counter. "We're not hiding." Liddy's voice dripped like syrup turning rancid. "You know, some folks say it ain't proper, bringing children into that kind of household. No father, no Bible, no blood." Sadie's fingers tightened around her mother's skirt. Agnes didn't blink. "Some folks mistake cruelty for righteousness, but it's still just cruelty." The room went still. Then Agnes paid and walked out without looking back. They returned to the ridge in silence, the wind lifting the hem of Agnes's coat and scattering dried leaves across the trail. Sadie didn't speak until they neared the cabin. "Why do they hate him?" she asked, her voice too small. Agnes touched her daughter's shoulder. "Because he's strong." And he didn't bow when they expected him to. That night, the wind changed. It came not from the north, but the east, dry and full of dust. Wina stood by the fence he'd begun building, a row of posts sunk deep into frozen earth, steady and defiant. He hadn't told Agnes he was building it, but she saw what it meant. A line, a boundary, a vow. "You think it will keep them out?" she asked softly. "No," he said, "but it tells them we're not leaving." The moon rose cold and round as a silver dollar. They stood side by side in its light, not touching, not speaking. Then Agnes said, "Sadie heard the town boys mocking her." "I know." She asked if she was yours. Wina turned, met her eyes. "What did you say?" Agnes swallowed. "I told her you don't have to be blood to be claimed." He nodded. "That's right." Agnes reached out then, just brushing his sleeve. "I want to believe we could stay, that this isn't just borrowed warmth." Wina looked at her hand. "Nothing's borrowed when you bled for it." The next morning, Sadie was gone. The cabin door hung ajar, snow blown inward like a breath held too long. Tommy sat by the hearth, clutching his horse, lip trembling. Agnes called her daughter's name, voice sharp with panic, but only wind answered. Wina was already moving, boots laced, rifle in hand. He knelt by the porch, studying the snow. Boot prints. Headed toward the river. "I'll come with you." "No. Stay with the boy." "But—" He turned, face like carved stone. "I'll bring her home." She nodded, biting her lip until it bled. Wina followed the tracks, his breath low and steady, his eyes scanning the trees. The snow here was deeper, laced with old animal paths. Her prints were light, erratic. She'd been crying. He found her by the frozen bend of the river, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at nothing. She didn't flinch when he stepped into view. "They said I don't belong," she said. He crouched beside her. "You cold?" he asked. She nodded. "A little." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted her into his arms without a word. She pressed her face into his neck, silent tears soaking his shirt. He said nothing on the walk back. But when they reached the cabin, Agnes rushed out, falling to her knees. gathering Sadie into her arms like she could tuck her soul back where it belonged. Wina stepped back, letting the moment be hers. That night, Agnes lit every lamp in the house. The cabin glowed like a lantern in the dark, a signal to whatever shadows might be watching. She found Wina sitting on the porch, polishing the rifle barrel with a cloth worn near through. "I told her she's mine," Agnes said. "In every way that counts." Wina nodded, not looking up. She asked again if you'd want to be her pa. This time, he looked at her. "And you?" Agnes met his gaze. "I think we're already something close." A gust of wind carried ashes from the stove into the air, scattering them across the snow like memory. "You know," she said, voice quiet, "I used to pray for escape, for someone to come rescue me. And now," she touched his hand, bold for once, "now I pray for one more morning like this." He didn't speak, but he let his hand stay beneath hers. In the distance, a hawk cut across the sky, silent and sure. Tomorrow would come, and with it the sheriff. The dawn was reluctant. It spilled gray and sluggish over the hills, as if even the sun was unsure of what would come. The air was brittle. The frost thick on the fence Wina had finished the night before. He stood beside it now, motionless, wrapped in his old coat. His breath came out in clouds, steady, like steam rising from a forge. Inside, Agnes braided Sadie's hair with trembling fingers. Tommy slept curled at her feet, arms wrapped around his wooden horse. The fire was low, but steady. She hadn't lit more wood, hadn't wanted to mask the quiet with noise. She kept glancing toward the door, waiting for Wina to come back in, to say something simple, like "coffee's ready" or "snow's light today." But he didn't move. She stepped outside finally, arms folded tight. Her boots crunched the frost-bitten earth. Wina didn't look at her. "They'll come soon," she said. "I know. Maybe we should pack." He turned then, slow and deliberate. "You want to run?" Agnes didn't answer. She looked out over the ridge where the first golden streaks of light touched the snow. "I want them to see we aren't afraid." Wina nodded. "Then we stay." She reached for his hand, and this time he took it. "I never asked you," she said, voice almost breaking, "why you live alone." Wina was quiet a long time. "My wife was named Sani. My daughter Wichapi." He said the names slowly, like laying stones in a river. "They were taken when soldiers raided our camp. I was out hunting. I came back to Ash." Agnes bowed her head. "I stopped saying their names. Figured if no one remembered them, they wouldn't have to suffer twice." "But you remember," she whispered. "Every day." She held tighter. "So do I. Every child I lost. Every one I couldn't save." They stood like that until the distant sound of hooves cut across the frozen hush. Wina looked toward the tree line. "He's not alone." "Sheriff." He nodded. By the time Sheriff Clegg's posse arrived, 3 men on horseback, rifles across their laps, the children were inside, the fire stoked, and Wina stood before his cabin with a rifle slung but untouched. Agnes stood beside him, chin raised. Her shawl flapped like a flag in the wind. Sheriff Clegg rode forward, boots caked in frost, his face pinched with conviction. "You were told," he said. "You had 2 days. It's been 3. "I count different," Wina replied. "You harboring a woman who's broken no laws, with children that ain't hers by blood. That makes you an accomplice in vagrancy and child deception." Agnes stepped forward. "Say it plain, Sheriff. You don't care about law. You care about shame." Clegg's eyes narrowed. "You're flaunting disgrace, Agnes May. Sleeping in a half-breed's shack like it's a church home." Wina said nothing. He didn't need to. The wind howled sudden through the trees. Somewhere behind them, a door creaked open. Miss Liddy Graves stepped into view, her apron dusted with flour. She held a loaf of bread in her arms, steaming and fresh. She walked past the sheriff's horse without a word and stood beside Agnes. "She didn't ask me for help," Liddy said. "But I'm giving it." Clegg stiffened. "You mind your place, widow." "I am," Liddy said. "Among women who kept going when the men left or died." A voice joined hers from the edge of town, old Mr. Warren, who rarely left his porch. "He built a fence, Sheriff. Not a fort. That means something. Others gathered. No torches. No signs. Just faces. Silent, but not backing away. Wina looked at Clegg. You came to remove them. Go ahead. The rifle on his back remained untouched. Agnes said softly, where you can see what family looks like, even if it doesn't wear your name. Clegg looked around. No one moved to his side. He reined his horse back, his jaw tight with the taste of losing. You make your bed here. Don't expect the town's help when winter turns hard. We haven't asked for it, Agnes said. He turned, his posse following, and vanished back into the trees. The crowd stood a moment longer. Then Miss Liddy placed the bread in Agnes's hands and walked away without another word. The wind died down. The snow stopped falling. Sadie opened the cabin door. Is it over? Wina nodded. For now. She stepped out, walked to him, and slipped her hand into his. You're not my pa, she said, but I want you to be. Agnes's eyes filled with tears. Tommy waddled out behind her, dragging his blanket, face bright in the cold. Wina crouched down, scooped the boy into his arms. Then stay, he said softly. All of you. That night, Agnes braided her hair before the mirror with unhurried fingers. The fire was steady, the cabin warm. Sadie curled up with a book. Tommy snored softly nearby. Wina stood behind Agnes, their reflections side by side. Never thought peace would look like this, she said. It don't look like anything, Wina replied. It feels like someone breathing beside you. She turned, rested her head against his chest. Outside, the wind picked up again. But it wasn't the cruel kind. It was the kind that carried things, stories, healing, hope. And somewhere beneath it all, a quiet lesson settled deep, waiting to be remembered by anyone who'd ever been cast aside. Not all families are born. Some arrive ragged and bruised, knocking on a stranger's door at dusk. Some are chosen again and again, not with words, but with warmth and wood and the silence of being seen. And if you ever find yourself lost beneath an empty sky, heart weary and hands trembling, listen. There just might be someone like Wina Black Elk waiting behind the door. Not because he owes you, but because love sometimes arrives quiet and stays.